The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the windows of Atlanta General Hospital when Sarah Johnson adjusted her nurse's uniform and started her usual morning rounds. At 32 years old, Sarah had been working in the rehabilitation ward for the past 5 years, and she loved every minute of it. Her dark skin glowed with warmth, and her friendly smile always brought comfort to her patients. That Wednesday morning seemed like any other day at first. Sarah checked her patient charts and went about her regular duties, her comfortable shoes making soft squeaking sounds against the clean hospital floor. She had no idea that this ordinary day would change her life forever. Around 10:30 a.m., the ward received a new patient transfer. Michael Cooper, a 35-year-old former construction worker, had been moved from the intensive care unit after a serious accident at his workplace 2 weeks ago. Sarah was assigned to help him get settled in his new room and review his care plan. When she walked into room 405, she found Michael staring out the window, his wheelchair positioned to catch the morning light. His strong shoulders and muscular arms showed his construction background, but his eyes held a deep sadness that touched Sarah's heart. The accident had left him paralyzed from the waist down, and according to his chart, he hadn't been very cooperative with the staff in the ICU. "Good morning, Mr. Cooper. I'm Sarah, and I'll be your primary nurse during your stay here," she said, keeping her voice gentle but professional. Michael barely turned his head, giving her just a slight nod of acknowledgement. Sarah wasn't discouraged by his response. She had seen many patients struggle with similar situations. Instead of pushing him to talk, she went about her work, explaining each thing she was doing in a calm, clear voice. She checked his vital signs, adjusted his pillows, and made sure he was comfortable. While she worked, she noticed several things about Michael. Despite his attempt to appear uninterested, he listened carefully to everything she said. She also spotted a small photo frame on his bedside table, a picture of him in work gear, smiling broadly while standing on a construction site. "That's quite an impressive building behind you in the photo," Sarah commented as she updated his chart. For the first time, Michael turned to look at her properly. "It was my last project," he said quietly. "We were building a new children's hospital." Something in the way he spoke made Sarah pause in her work. "Was it your design?" she asked, genuinely interested. "No," Michael replied, a tiny smile appearing on his face for the first time. "But I was the site supervisor. Been in construction since I was 18. Over the next hour, as Sarah helped Michael with his morning routine and medications, they talked about his work. She learned that he had started as a basic laborer and worked his way up to becoming a supervisor. He spoke with pride about the buildings he had helped create, and Sarah found herself fascinated by his stories. What surprised Sarah most was how easy it was to talk to Michael once he opened up. He had a quiet sense of humor and a way of explaining things that made even complicated construction terms understandable. She noticed that when he talked about his work, the sadness in his eyes lifted a little. Before leaving his room, Sarah reviewed his physical therapy schedule with him. "I know it seems tough right now," she said, seeing his expression darken at the mention of therapy, "but I've seen many patients make amazing progress. You're not alone in this journey." Michael looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe her. Finally, he nodded. "Thank you, Sarah," he said softly. "You're the first person who's talked to me like a normal human being since the accident." Sarah felt something warm stir in her heart at his words. As she left his room to continue her rounds, she found herself thinking about Michael's smile when he talked about his work. There was something special about him, something that went beyond just being another patient. Little did Sarah know that this first meeting would be the beginning of an extraordinary journey. A journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, strength, and the power of human connection. As she walked down the hospital corridor, she couldn't have imagined that the quiet man in room 405 would one day become the most important person in her life. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself looking forward to her shifts at the hospital more than ever before. Her morning rounds always seemed to take her to room 405 first, where Michael's smile grew warmer with each passing day. Their conversations became longer, and soon other nurses noticed how Michael's whole mood changed whenever Sarah was around. However, not everyone saw their growing friendship in a positive light. One morning, Sarah overheard two of her coworkers whispering in the break room. "She's just feeling sorry for him," one said. "I mean, what kind of future could they have? He's in a wheelchair." The other nodded, adding, "And let's be real. A successful black woman like her could do so much better. Sarah's hands shook as she prepared Michael's medications that day, angry tears threatening to fall. She had always known people could be prejudiced, but hearing such comments about something so personal hurt deeply. When she entered Michael's room, he immediately noticed something was wrong. "Bad day?" he asked, wheeling himself closer to where she stood. Sarah took a deep breath and decided to be honest. "Just some people saying stupid things," she said, trying to smile. "Nothing I haven't heard before." Michael watched her carefully. "About us?" he asked quietly. When Sarah nodded, he sighed. "My friends have been saying things too. They think you're just being nice because it's your job." That weekend, Sarah decided to tell her parents about Michael. She invited them over for Sunday dinner, something they did regularly. As they sat around her small dining table, she talked about the amazing man she had met, how smart and funny he was, and how much she enjoyed spending time with him. Her mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "A patient?" "Sarah, honey, are you sure that's appropriate?" Her father was more direct. "Is this why you're still single at 32? Because you're falling for someone who can't take care of you?" "Dad," Sarah exclaimed, pushing back from the table, "Michael is more than capable of taking care of himself and others. His disability doesn't define who he is." Meanwhile, Michael was having his own battles. His best friend Tom visited him at the hospital, and the conversation quickly turned serious. "Mike, buddy, I'm worried about you," Tom said. "This nurse, Sarah, she seems great, but are you sure she's not just feeling sorry for you? And let's be honest, man, her family probably won't accept you." Michael's response was firm. "Sarah sees me for who I am, Tom, not my wheelchair, not my limitations. She challenges me to be better, to work harder in therapy. And yes, she's black, and I'm white, and I'm in a wheelchair, but none of that matters when we're together." As the days turned into weeks, Sarah and Michael's bond grew stronger. During his physical therapy sessions, Sarah would often stop by during her breaks to encourage him. She celebrated every small victory with him, the first time he managed to transfer himself from the bed to his wheelchair without help, the day he successfully completed a challenging therapy exercise. One evening, as Sarah's shift was ending, she found Michael in the hospital's small garden, practicing his wheelchair maneuvers. The setting sun cast a golden glow over everything, and Sarah thought he had never looked more handsome. "My parents want to meet you," she said, sitting on a nearby bench. "They're still worried, but they can see how happy I am." Michael looked nervous but determined. "And you're sure about this? About us? It won't be easy, Sarah. People will always talk, always judge." Sarah reached out and took his hand. "I've never been more sure of anything," she said firmly. "Let them talk. We know what we have is real." That moment in the garden marked a turning point for both of them. They realized that their love was stronger than any prejudice they might face. Michael's determination in physical therapy doubled, and Sarah started learning everything she could about adaptive technologies and accessibility. The whispers in the hospital corridors gradually changed from judgment to admiration. The same coworkers who had doubted them now watched in amazement as Sarah and Michael proved that love truly knows no boundaries. Their story became an inspiration to other patients in the rehabilitation ward, showing that disability and racial differences were no barrier to finding real happiness. As spring turned into summer, Sarah and Michael's relationship blossomed into something beautiful and deep. Michael had moved out of the hospital and into his own apartment, specially adapted for his wheelchair. Sarah helped him settle in, and they began learning how to navigate their new life together. Their first real date outside the hospital was both exciting and challenging. Michael had chosen a nice restaurant downtown, wanting to make it special for Sarah. He had called ahead to make sure the place was wheelchair accessible, but when they arrived, they found the ramp was too steep for him to manage comfortably on his own. Sarah noticed Michael's face turn red with frustration, but before he could say anything, she smiled and said, "Hey, that's what teamwork is for, right?" Together, they figured out the best way to handle the ramp, with Sarah providing just enough support without making Michael feel helpless. It became their first lesson in working as a team. Inside the restaurant, they got a few curious looks from other diners, but Sarah and Michael were too busy enjoying each other's company to notice. Michael told Sarah stories about his childhood in Boston, and she shared memories of growing up in Atlanta with her three sisters. They laughed together when Michael accidentally dropped his fork and smoothly retrieved it with the grabbing tool he always carried, saying, "See, I've got skills." After dinner, they went for a roll through the nearby park. The summer evening was perfect, with a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. Sarah walked beside Michael's wheelchair, and they talked about everything and nothing. When they reached a beautiful spot near a fountain, Michael pulled out his phone and asked a passing jogger to take their picture. It was their first photo together outside the hospital, and both of them were grinning from ear to ear. As weeks passed, they developed their own routine. Every Saturday, they went grocery shopping together. Michael would carry the bags on his lap while maneuvering his wheelchair, insisting on being helpful. Sarah learned to slow down her natural fast walking pace to match his chair, and soon they moved together like a well-choreographed dance. They also faced intimate moments of vulnerability. One evening, while they were cooking dinner together in Michael's kitchen, which he had modified to be accessible from his wheelchair, he knocked over a pot of pasta. The hot water thankfully missed them both, but Michael's frustration boiled over. "I hate this," he shouted, banging his fist on his wheelchair. "I hate that everything has to be so complicated. I hate that I can't even cook a simple meal without making a mess." Sarah knelt beside him, taking his trembling hands in hers. "Listen to me, Michael Cooper," she said firmly. "You are not your wheelchair. You are not your disability. You are the man who makes me laugh until my sides hurt, who knows more about building structures than anyone I've ever met, and who has the biggest heart I know. We'll clean this up together, and then we'll order pizza." Michael looked at her for a long moment before a small smile broke through his tears. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked softly. Sarah grinned. "I'm the lucky one," she replied, reaching up to wipe his cheek. "Now, let's get this cleaned up before my stomach starts growling." Their relationship grew stronger through these moments of honesty and vulnerability. Sarah learned when to help and when to step back, understanding that Michael needed to maintain his independence. Michael, in turn, learned that accepting help didn't make him less of a man. They also discovered new ways to enjoy life together. Michael taught Sarah about architecture during their city walks, pointing out interesting building features she had never noticed before. Sarah introduced Michael to her love of jazz music, and they often spent evenings listening to records in his living room, with Sarah sitting on the couch while Michael played air guitar in his wheelchair. One day, while they were having a picnic in the park, a little girl came up to them and asked Michael why he was in a wheelchair. Before Sarah could intervene, Michael smiled at the child and explained in simple terms about his accident. The girl nodded thoughtfully and then asked if she could sit in his regular chair while he was using his rolling chair. Her innocent question made them both laugh, and Sarah watched with a full heart as Michael chatted with the curious child. That evening, as Sarah was getting ready to leave Michael's apartment, he caught her hand. "You know what?" he said softly. "I think we're getting pretty good at this." Sarah smiled, leaning down to kiss him. "We sure are," she replied. "One day at a time." Michael had been planning this day for 3 months. Every detail needed to be perfect. For weeks, he had been secretly working with his physical therapist, Jenny, practicing a special movement that would make this moment unforgettable. His arms were stronger now, and with the help of his arm supports, he could balance himself in a way that few would expect. The morning of the big day arrived bright and clear. Sarah thought they were just going for their usual Saturday picnic in Centennial Olympic Park. She packed their favorite sandwiches, while Michael secretly checked his pocket for the 100th time, making sure the small velvet box was still there. "You seem nervous today," Sarah said as she pushed the picnic basket on her lap while walking beside Michael's wheelchair. "Is everything okay?" Michael tried to keep his voice steady. "Just excited to enjoy this beautiful day with you," he replied, his heart beating faster. He had chosen a specific spot near the fountain, where he had already arranged for Sarah's family to hide nearby. Even Tom, his best friend, was there with a camera, pretending to be a tourist. They found their usual picnic spot under a large oak tree. The autumn leaves were starting to change color, creating a perfect golden backdrop. Sarah spread out their checkered blanket and sat down, but Michael stayed in his wheelchair, which was unusual for their picnics. "Aren't you going to join me on the blanket?" Sarah asked, patting the space next to her. Michael took a deep breath. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something first." His voice shook slightly, and Sarah noticed his hands trembling on his armrests. "Sarah," He began, "These past 8 months have been the most amazing time of my life. When I had my accident, I thought my life was over. I was angry at the world and couldn't see any future for myself." Sarah watched him with growing emotion as he continued speaking. "But then you walked into room 405, and everything changed. You didn't see me as just another patient in a wheelchair. You saw me, Michael Cooper, the man behind the injury." To Sarah's surprise, Michael began to move. Using his arm supports and all the strength he had built up during his secret practice sessions, he slowly balanced himself on one knee beside his wheelchair. A collective gasp came from nearby, and Sarah suddenly noticed their families emerging from their hiding spots. "Michael," she exclaimed, tears starting to form in her eyes. "How are you?" "I've been practicing," he said, his arms shaking slightly with the effort, but his voice growing stronger. "Because I wanted to do this right." With one hand still on his support, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the velvet box. "Sarah Johnson, you came into my life when I was at my lowest point, and you showed me that love has no limitations. You never saw my disability as a barrier, only as another part of our journey together. You make me want to be better every day, not just for you, but for us." By now, a small crowd had gathered, watching in awe as Michael maintained his position. Sarah's sisters were crying openly, and her father had his arm around her mother, who was pressing a handkerchief to her eyes. "I know our life together will have challenges," Michael continued, opening the box to reveal a beautiful diamond ring. "But I also know that there's nothing we can't handle together. You're my best friend, my strongest supporter, and the love of my life." Sarah was openly crying now, her hands covering her mouth in surprise and joy. "So, Sarah Johnson," Michael said, his voice clear and full of love, "would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" For a moment, everything was silent in the park. Even the fountain seemed to quiet down. Sarah looked at Michael, balanced there on one knee, showing her and the world that love could overcome any obstacle. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The park erupted in applause as Sarah carefully helped Michael back into his wheelchair before he placed the ring on her finger. Their families rushed forward to congratulate them, and Tom captured everything on camera, including the moment when Sarah leaned down to give Michael their first kiss as an engaged couple. As their loved ones celebrated around them, Michael pulled Sarah close and whispered, "Thank you for making me the happiest man in Atlanta." Sarah smiled through her tears. "Thank you for showing me what true love really means." Planning a wedding was more complicated than Sarah and Michael had expected. 3 months after their beautiful engagement in the park, they sat at Michael's kitchen table, surrounded by wedding magazines, venue brochures, and Sarah's laptop showing even more options. "This one looks beautiful," Sarah said, pointing to a grand hotel ballroom on her screen. "But," she trailed off, not wanting to state the obvious. "But the entrance has 3 steps and no ramp," Michael finished for her, trying to keep his voice light. This had become a common issue in their search. Many beautiful venues weren't properly accessible for someone in a wheelchair. Their first real challenge came when they visited what seemed like a perfect venue, a gorgeous garden with an indoor reception area. The owner greeted them with a bright smile, but it quickly faded when she saw Michael in his wheelchair. "Oh," she said, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I'm not sure if, how would you?" She kept stumbling over her words. Sarah felt her anger rising, but Michael reached for her hand and spoke calmly. "Maybe you could show us around? We can figure out what modifications might be needed." His professional construction background came in handy as he pointed out simple solutions for making the space more accessible. The owner's attitude changed completely when she realized Michael knew more about building modifications than she did. By the end of the visit, she was enthusiastically discussing installing temporary ramps and making sure all paths were wheelchair-friendly. Then came the challenge of finding a wedding suit. The first formal wear store they visited didn't even have a fitting room large enough for Michael's wheelchair. The second store's salesman spoke only to Sarah, acting as if Michael wasn't there. They left both places feeling discouraged. "Maybe we should just have a simple ceremony at the courthouse," Michael suggested one evening, after another frustrating day of planning. Sarah sat on the couch next to his wheelchair and took his hands in hers. "No way, Michael Cooper. You deserve your dream wedding just as much as I do. We'll find a way." Their luck changed when they found a small family-owned suit shop. The owner's son used a wheelchair himself, and they had experience making suits for people with different mobility needs. The tailor knew exactly how to adjust a suit for someone who would be sitting all day, making sure it would look perfect in photos. Dance lessons brought another set of emotions to deal with. Sarah had always dreamed of her first dance as a married couple, and Michael worried about disappointing her. "I can't twirl you around the dance floor like other grooms," he said quietly during their first lesson. Their dance instructor, Maria, just smiled. "Maybe not, but you can create something even more beautiful." She showed them how Michael could spin Sarah while in his wheelchair, how they could move together in perfect harmony, and how to make their dance unique to them. As they practiced their dance in Michael's living room one evening, Sarah looked down at him with tears in her eyes. "This is better than any traditional dance I could have imagined," she said softly. The guest list brought its own challenges. Some of Michael's relatives wrote back saying they didn't approve of their marriage, though it wasn't clear if they meant because of his disability or because Sarah was black. Sarah's extended family had similar reactions. "Good," Sarah said firmly, putting their decline cards aside. "We only want people who support our love at our wedding anyway." One of the most touching moments came when they met with their wedding photographer, David. Instead of acting awkward or uncertain like many others had, he immediately started suggesting creative angles and poses that would capture their unique love story. "Your wedding photos shouldn't try to hide your wheelchair," David explained, showing them some sample shots. "It's part of who you are as a couple. We'll show how beautifully you work together." As their wedding day got closer, Sarah and Michael realized that each challenge they overcame made them stronger. They were creating not just a wedding, but a statement about love overcoming all barriers. "You know what?" Sarah said one evening as they finalized their plans. "All these challenges are just making our wedding more special. We're doing this our way." Michael smiled, pulling her down for a kiss. "Our way is the best way," he replied. "And just wait until you see the surprise I'm planning for our special day." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What surprise?" But Michael just smiled mysteriously, keeping his secret safe for the perfect moment that was yet to come. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself was celebrating Sarah and Michael's special day. The garden venue they had chosen looked magical, with white chairs lined up on either side of a smooth, wide path specially installed for Michael's wheelchair. White and purple flowers decorated every corner, and soft music played in the background. In the bridal suite, Sarah's sisters helped her get ready. Her wedding dress was beautiful, an elegant white gown that would flow perfectly whether she was standing or sitting beside Michael in his wheelchair during the reception. Her mother stood in the doorway, wiping tears from her eyes. "Baby girl, you look like an angel," her mother said, coming forward to adjust Sarah's veil. "I need to tell you something. When you first told us about Michael, I was worried and afraid, but seeing how happy he makes you, how you two solve problems together, I've never been more wrong in my life. He's the perfect man for you." Sarah hugged her mother carefully, trying not to wrinkle her dress. "Thank you, Mom. That means everything to me." In another room, Michael was getting ready with help from his best man, Tom. His new suit fit perfectly, specially tailored to look immaculate while he sat in his wheelchair. The wheelchair itself had been decorated with small white and purple flowers to match the wedding theme. "How are you feeling?" Tom asked, helping Michael with his tie. "Nervous," Michael admitted. "But not about marrying Sarah. Never about that. I just want everything to be perfect for her." "Trust me," Tom said with a knowing smile, thinking about the surprise they had planned. "It's going to be more than perfect." At exactly 2 p.m., the ceremony began. The garden was filled with their closest friends and family, the ones who had supported their love from the beginning. The wheelchair-friendly aisle runner was decorated with flower petals, and soft music played as the wedding party began their entrance. Michael wheeled himself to the altar first, looking handsome and confident. His eyes never left the garden entrance, waiting for his bride. When the wedding march began playing, everyone stood and turned to watch. Sarah appeared at the entrance with her father beside her. She moved slowly down the aisle, her dress flowing beautifully around her. Michael felt tears forming in his eyes as he watched her approach. To him, she had never looked more beautiful. Their vows were personal and heartfelt. Michael went first, his voice strong and clear. "Sarah, you saw me when I felt invisible. You loved me when I couldn't love myself. With you, my wheelchair isn't a barrier, it's just our unique way of moving through life together. I promise to love you, support you, and be your partner in all of life's adventures. Sarah's voice shook with emotion as she spoke her vows. Michael, you taught me what real strength looks like. It's not about physical abilities. It's about having the courage to love completely, to face challenges together, and to create our own path. I promise to be your partner, your best friend, and your biggest supporter, today and always. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Sarah leaned down to kiss Michael, and the garden erupted in cheers and applause. Several guests were crying, touched by the obvious love between the newlyweds. The photographer captured beautiful moments throughout the ceremony. The way Sarah and Michael looked at each other, their joined hands, the joy on their faces. Just as they had hoped, the photos showed their love story exactly as it was, wheelchair and all. At the reception, the first dance surprised everyone. Michael and Sarah moved together gracefully, her dress swirling as she spun around his wheelchair, their practiced movements showing perfect harmony. Some guests wiped away tears, but Sarah and Michael were lost in their own world, moving to the music as if they'd been dancing together all their lives. During the father-daughter dance, Sarah's dad leaned down and whispered, "You chose well, baby girl. That man loves you more than life itself." Sarah smiled, watching Michael talking and laughing with guests at their table. "I know, Dad, and I love him just as much." The reception was full of joy, laughter, and love. No one saw Michael slip away briefly with Tom, or noticed the knowing smiles between some of the groomsmen. The biggest surprise of the day was yet to come, waiting for the perfect moment during the bouquet toss. The wedding reception was in full swing when the DJ announced it was time for the bouquet toss. All the single ladies gathered in the center of the dance floor, laughing and joking about who might catch the bouquet. Sarah stood at the front of the room, holding her beautiful purple and white bouquet, ready for the traditional toss. What nobody knew, except for Tom and a few trusted friends, was that Michael had been preparing for this moment for 6 months. While everyone thought he was just doing his regular physical therapy, he had actually been secretly working with a specialist team. They had fitted him with innovative leg braces and trained him extensively to stand for short periods. "Ready for the bouquet toss, ladies?" the DJ called out. But before Sarah could turn around, Tom wheeled Michael to the center of the dance floor. "Wait," Michael said into the microphone Tom handed him. "Before Sarah throws the bouquet, I have a surprise for my beautiful wife." The room fell silent. Sarah turned around, confusion clear on her face. "Michael?" Tom and 2 of Michael's groomsmen quickly moved to his sides, while another friend brought out what looked like 2 metal poles. The guests watched in curiosity as the men set up the support bars on either side of Michael's wheelchair. "Sarah," Michael spoke, his voice filled with emotion. "When I fell in love with you, I promised myself I would do everything possible to give you all your dreams. I know you never cared whether I could stand or not, but I wanted to share this special moment with you standing by your side." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as she realized what was about to happen. The wedding guests leaned forward in their seats, hardly daring to breathe. Slowly, with practiced movements, Michael reached for the support bars. Tom helped him secure the specially designed leg braces, which had been hidden under his suit pants all day. The room was absolutely silent except for the soft background music. Then, using all his strength and months of secret training, Michael began to push himself up. His arms trembled with effort, but his face showed pure determination. Inch by inch, he rose from his wheelchair. Sarah started crying, still clutching her bouquet. "Oh my God," she whispered, watching her husband stand for the first time since his accident. Finally, Michael was fully upright, supported by the bars and braces, but definitely standing. He was almost as tall as Sarah remembered from their first meeting at the hospital. The room erupted in gasps, followed by thunderous applause. "Surprise," Michael said softly, smiling at his wife through his own tears. Sarah ran to him, careful not to disturb his balance, and wrapped her arms around him. For the first time, they embraced while standing together. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. "How did you do this?" Sarah asked through her tears. "When did you?" "I've been practicing every day for 6 months," Michael explained. "I wanted to stand beside you, just for a moment, on our wedding day." The photographer was capturing every second, knowing these would be moments the couple would treasure forever. The light in the reception hall seemed to glow around them, making the scene even more magical. "Now," Michael said with a grin, "weren't you about to throw that bouquet?" Sarah laughed through her tears. "You mean you can stay standing?" "For a few minutes," Michael nodded. "So you better make this quick." With joyful tears still streaming down her face, Sarah turned her back to the crowd of waiting women. But instead of throwing the bouquet right away, she reached back and squeezed Michael's hand one more time. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he replied. "Now throw it, honey. These braces are strong, but they're not meant for marathon standing." Laughing, Sarah tossed the bouquet over her shoulder. As the single ladies scrambled to catch it, she turned back to Michael, not caring who got the flowers. All she cared about was this moment, standing next to her husband, their love proving once again that nothing was impossible. The bouquet was caught by Sarah's youngest sister, but hardly anyone noticed. All eyes were still on Sarah and Michael, standing together, showing the world that true love knows no boundaries, that with determination and love, miracles can happen. The video of Michael standing at their wedding went viral overnight. Someone had recorded the moment on their phone, and within hours, it was being shared across social media platforms worldwide. News stations started calling, wanting to interview the couple whose love story had touched millions of hearts. But for Sarah and Michael, life after their wedding was about much more than those few minutes of fame. They returned from their honeymoon in the Bahamas, where they had stayed at a fully accessible resort, ready to start their new life together. They moved into a beautiful single-story house that Michael helped design. Using his construction background, he worked with architects to create a home that was both fully accessible and stylish. Wide doorways, adjusted counter heights, and smooth flooring made it easy for him to move around, while Sarah's touch added warm, cozy details that made it feel like home. "You know what people keep asking me?" Sarah said one morning as they sat having breakfast in their new kitchen. She was reading emails on her phone, responding to yet another interview request. "What's that?" Michael asked, skillfully maneuvering his wheelchair to place their dishes in the sink. "They want to know if you'll keep using those leg braces to stand more often," she said, looking at him with a gentle smile. "They think that's the most important part of our story." Michael wheeled back to the table and took her hand. "But they're missing the point, aren't they? Standing up at our wedding was special, but it's not what makes our marriage work. It's this. Just being together, figuring out life as a team." Sarah leaned over to kiss him. "Exactly. Though I have to admit, it was a pretty amazing surprise." Their life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah continued her nursing career, now working at a rehabilitation center where she could help other patients the way she had once helped Michael. Her experience with him made her especially good at encouraging patients and their families to see beyond their disabilities. Michael started a consulting business, using his construction expertise to help make buildings more accessible. He worked with architects and contractors, showing them how small changes could make a big difference for people with disabilities. His wheelchair became an advantage, allowing him to spot issues that others might miss. They had their challenges, of course. Some days were harder than others. There were times when Michael's back pain was bad, or when they encountered places that weren't wheelchair-friendly. But they faced everything together, often finding creative solutions that helped not just them, but others in similar situations. 6 months after their wedding, they started a YouTube channel called Rolling Through Life Together. They shared their daily experiences, tips for other couples where one partner used a wheelchair, and general advice about love and relationships. Their authentic, honest approach attracted thousands of subscribers. "We got another comment today," Michael said one evening as they relaxed in their living room. "A young guy who just started using a wheelchair. He said our videos gave him hope that he could find love too." Sarah smiled, sitting on the couch next to his wheelchair. "That's why we do this. Remember how you felt in that hospital room when we first met? If we can help others see that life and love don't end with disability, then sharing our story is worth it." Their first wedding anniversary approached, and Michael had another surprise planned. He had been practicing with his leg braces again, determined to share another standing dance with Sarah. But when he told her his plan, she shook her head. "Save your strength for when we really need it," she said, pulling him close. "I love dancing with you just the way we are." That evening, they danced in their living room, Sarah moving gracefully around Michael's wheelchair, just as they had done at their wedding. As Michael spun her around, Both of them laughing, they knew they had found something rare and precious, a love that transcended physical limitations, overcame prejudices, and proved that true romance isn't about being perfect, but about being perfect for each other. The viral video of their wedding bouquet moment had faded from public memory, but its message lived on in their daily life. Their story wasn't about a man in a wheelchair who managed to stand on his wedding day. It was about two people who showed the world that love doesn't need legs to stand strong, it just needs two hearts beating as one.